Aberdeen, Scotland. A cold, wet February night in 1973. Rain streaks down the windows of a small club van parked outside the venue, and inside, the air backstage is thick with cigarette smoke, spilled beer, and the electric hum of amplifiers still cooling down. Rudolf Schenker stands in a narrow corridor, guitar case still in his hand, his ears still ringing from the set. Something feels wrong. His younger brother Michael, only 17 years old, will not look him in the eye. Just an hour earlier, that same teenager had stood under the stage lights and torn through a guitar solo so blistering that musicians from the headlining band stopped what they were doing in the wings just to watch. Now Michael is quiet, too quiet, staring at the floor, his guitar strap still slung over his shoulder like armor he isn't ready to take off. Rudolf does not know it yet, but in the next few days, the band he built from nothing, the band he had poured 8 years of his life into, is about to lose the one person nobody thought they could survive without. And the group would not even carry the name the world would one day chant in packed stadiums. It was still becoming Scorpions. This is the story of the night a teenage prodigy nearly walked away with everything, and the desperate scramble that saved a legend before it ever truly had the chance to begin. Rewind to 1965, in Hannover, West Germany. Rudolf Schenker is barely out of his teens himself, a serious, driven young rhythm guitarist with a vision nobody around him quite shares yet. Post-war Germany's music scene is still finding its own voice, caught somewhere between polite Schlager pop on the radio and the electric storm blowing in from Britain and America. Rudolf wants something harder, something with teeth, something loud enough to make people forget the world outside for a while. He forms a band and gives it a name meant to sound dangerous, sharp, unforgettable: Scorpions. In the beginning, it is nothing more than local gigs in smoky halls, borrowed amplifiers held together with tape, and long van rides through the German countryside, chasing whatever booking they can get. But Rudolf has a secret weapon waiting for him at home, in the family's own living room. His little brother Michael, nearly 10 years younger, is already picking up a guitar and doing something with it that stops grown men in their tracks. Rudolf sits and watches this child work out scales and licks with an intensity that feels almost frightening for someone so young. By the time Michael is barely a teenager, he is not just talented, he is otherworldly, playing with a fire and precision far beyond his years. Rudolf makes a decision that will shape the next chapter of his life. He invites his baby brother into Scorpions. It is a gamble, handing so much of the band's future to a boy who cannot even legally sit inside the clubs they play in. But Rudolf believes in blood, and he believes in genius when he sees it standing right in front of him. By 1972, that gamble looks like it might finally pay off. Scorpions released their debut album, Lonesome Crow, a moody, adventurous record that catches the ear of German film director Roland Klick, who uses its music in his movie of the same name. It is a small breakthrough, but a real one. The first sign that this band from Hannover might actually go somewhere. And on that record, it is Michael Schenker's guitar work that critics and fellow musicians keep coming back to. This impossibly young player already carving out a voice entirely his own, equal parts fury and melody. Rudolf, ever the architect, senses a bigger opportunity. If a German band wants to be taken seriously in the world of rock, it has to prove itself where rock and roll actually lives and breathes. It has to go to Britain. So Scorpions land a support slot on a UK tour, opening for a rising English band called UFO, sharing cramped dressing rooms, borrowed gear, and long overnight drives between towns neither brother has ever seen before. For young Michael, barely out of school, it is a dream made real, his guitar echoing through halls in the very country that invented so much of the music he worships. Night after night, he steps out from behind his brother's steady rhythm chords into the spotlight, and something starts happening that nobody in the Scorpions camp fully anticipated. Word begins to travel through the tour. The teenager on the opening act, the one nobody in the crowd came to see, is quietly stealing the show. UFO, meanwhile, is quietly falling apart at the seams. Their guitarist, Mick Bolton, has grown distant from the band, his playing inconsistent night to night, his commitment fading fast just as the group is trying to build real momentum. Behind the scenes, UFO's management and its remaining members, singer Phil Mogg, bassist Pete Way, and drummer Andy Parker among them, are growing anxious. A band is only as strong as the sound coming out of its guitar, and UFO's sound is losing its edge at exactly the wrong moment. Then, every single night on this very tour, they watch a solution walk out onto the stage before they even do. A teenager barely able to grow a proper beard, playing with more fire, more instinct, more raw command of the instrument than their own guitarist can currently summon on his best night. At first, it seems like idle backstage flattery, guitarists nodding to each other in passing, an amplifier borrowed, a compliment paid over warm beer after the show. But flattery has a way of curdling into calculation. UFO's camp begins watching Michael Schenker, not as a fellow musician sharing their bill, but as a problem waiting to be solved. Their problem. And there he is, every single night, close enough to simply ask. The approach, when it finally comes, is careful and quiet, the way these things usually are. A conversation lingers after sound check. A drink is offered backstage, one musician to another. Someone from UFO's inner circle finds a moment alone with Michael, away from his brother, away from the rest of Scorpions, to plant one simple, devastating question. What if he did not have to be the little brother in someone else's band? What if he became the lead guitarist of an act already building real momentum across Britain and beyond? For a 17-year-old who has spent his whole short career being introduced as Rudolf's kid brother, the words land like a lightning bolt through his chest. Michael is proud of Scorpions. He loves his brother fiercely. But he is also a teenager who has just discovered, night after night, that his playing alone can silence a room, and the temptation to find out what he could become without anyone else's name attached to his own is enormous. Each night after that quiet conversation, walking off stage to applause that is unmistakably meant for him and no one else, the pull only grows stronger. He does not tell Rudolf right away. He carries the offer privately, turning it over and over, torn between loyalty to his brother and the terrifying, thrilling idea of finally stepping into his own light. The moment finally comes on that cold February night in Aberdeen. Rudolf finds Michael in the corridor, and the words come out haltingly at first, a teenager struggling to tell his own brother that he is leaving. UFO has asked him to join. He has said yes. Rudolf stands frozen, the news landing like a physical blow to the chest. This is not some replaceable session player quietly walking away. This is his own flesh and blood, the beating heart of the band's sound. The guitarist audiences on this very tour had started coming specifically to see. Rudolf had built Scorpions around a shared family dream stretching back 8 years, and in one short, awkward conversation backstage, that dream cracks wide open right in front of him. There is no shouting, not at first, just the heavy silence of two brothers realizing their paths are about to split apart in front of an audience that has no idea any of this is happening just a few feet away. Rudolf asks the only question that actually matters: is this truly what Michael wants? And Michael, unable to fully meet his brother's eyes, says yes. Somewhere down the corridor, the sound of another band's equipment being loaded into a van echoes off the walls, ordinary and indifferent to the fact that a family's musical future is quietly, irreversibly ending, right here, in the space between two brothers and two words. There is no time to grieve quietly. The tour does not stop for broken hearts. The very next night, Scorpions are still booked, still billed, still expected on a stage in front of a paying crowd who know nothing of what happened backstage 24 hours earlier. Rudolf and Michael have to walk out together one more time, plug in, and play as if nothing has changed, even though everything has. Witnesses from those final shows would later describe something strange in the air, a rawness, an intensity that felt different from the nights before. Perhaps Michael, knowing this chapter was already closing, poured something extra into those last performances. Perhaps Rudolf, watching his brother from a few feet away, was already trying to memorize what it felt like to share a stage with him, uncertain if he ever would again. When the lights finally came up and the amplifiers were switched off for what both brothers understood was the final time as bandmates in this lineup, there was no dramatic goodbye, no tearful embrace in front of the crew. Just two young men coiling up cables in silence, each one carrying a version of the same band's history in his hands, about to walk in two very different directions. In the days that follow, the full weight of the crisis lands squarely on Rudolf's shoulders. There are still shows booked further down the schedule. There are still commitments to promoters, to fans who paid for tickets expecting to hear the same band that had wowed them the night before. And now Scorpions do not have a lead guitarist at all. Rudolf lies awake in cheap hotel rooms running through the arithmetic of disaster. Cancel the remaining tour, and the band's fragile momentum in Britain, the entire reason they crossed the channel in the first place, evaporates overnight. Try to continue, and he has no idea who could possibly fill the space his own brother leaves behind. Doubt creeps into every corner of his thinking. Was this the end before the band had truly even started? Had he built something too fragile, too dependent on one extraordinary talent to survive losing it? Bands broke up over far less than this. Rudolf had watched it happen to other promising groups, acts that simply dissolved the moment one key member walked out the door for good. He has every reason to believe Scorpions could quietly cease to exist, remembered only as a footnote in somebody else's origin story instead of a legend of their own making. But something stubborn in Rudolf, the same drive that made him start a rock band in a country still finding its rock and roll voice, refuses to let the story end in a cold, rain-soaked corridor in Scotland. Rudolf makes a choice that surprises everyone, including himself. Rather than retreat home to Hannover in defeat, he stays close to the situation, even temporarily joining UFO's own touring lineup for a stretch as a rhythm guitarist, watching his brother's new band from the inside, learning, adapting, refusing to simply vanish from the scene he had fought so hard to reach. It is an almost unthinkable move, the older brother following the younger one into another band's orbit rather than walking away in bitterness. But it buys him something invaluable: time, contacts, and a front-row seat to how a professional, internationally touring act actually operates night after night. And back home, quietly, he begins the real work of rebuilding, searching for a guitarist who could somehow fill an impossible gap. That search leads him to a young German player named Uli Jon Roth, discovered playing in a small club with his own band. A guitarist with a singular, almost classical sense of melody, utterly different from Michael's raw fire, but carrying an intensity all his own. It is not a replacement in any true sense. Nobody could simply replace what Michael brought to that stage. It is something new entirely, a second chance for Scorpions to define their sound on their own terms, without leaning on the shadow of what they had just lost. Out of that crisis, slowly and painfully, a new version of the band begins to take shape. Uli Jon Roth steps fully into Scorpions, and Rudolf channels every ounce of his stubborn resolve into keeping the group alive and moving forward, refusing to let one departure become the whole story. The album that follows, Fly to the Rainbow, released in 1974, becomes a document of that transition itself, a band quite literally finding its new voice in real time, forged in the immediate aftermath of losing everything it once thought it needed to survive. Michael even leaves his fingerprints on part of the record before the handover is complete, one last echo of the old lineup bleeding into the new one. It is not an easy record to make. There is grief woven into it, uncertainty in every unfamiliar solo, but also a defiant kind of hope pushing through the cracks. Rudolf Schenker, the architect who refused to let his own creation crumble in a Scottish corridor, steadily pushes the band toward a heavier, more ambitious sound that will keep evolving further still, through more lineup changes, more crises, more nights that could easily have ended it all, until Scorpions become the arena-conquering force the entire world would eventually come to know. And Michael Schenker, the teenager who once could not meet his own brother's eyes in that Aberdeen corridor, goes on to become one of the most influential rock guitarists of his generation, with UFO, shaping records that guitar players still study today. Years later, fate brings the two brothers back together on stage more than once, proof that the bond between them survived even when the band itself very nearly did not. What felt, in that freezing February of 1973, like the death of a dream inside one cramped dressing room, turned out instead to be the moment that quietly forged it, the crack that let something stronger grow back in its place. Because sometimes the story the world remembers as a triumphant legacy was, at its very beginning, nothing more than one brother's stubborn refusal to let a single devastating night have the final word.